Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Sports Hub right here on SBTV. I'm Jake Zahn, and here with me are Alex Strouf and Michael Wengrzyn. Happy Monday, guys. How's your Monday going?
My Monday's going phenomenally, Jake. Thanks so much for asking. It's a busy week as sports are starting to swing. Multiple things happening, and that's a good thing. We're hectic. We're busy, but we're good. Mike, how's everything on your end?
Everything's pretty good on my end. It wasn't really great in terms of the weather coming down with all the snow coming down. I did a little slipping and sliding as I was driving back home, but that's all right. Got back safe, and I'm here.
Seems to be a common theme with you, the slipping and sliding. We can't have Big Mike out on the road this winter, I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, the weather was all right. It was a little hard to drive, but it was beautiful, and that's all that really matters. Am I right, guys?
That was adorable. Yes,
that's true.
That's true.
Today's show, Alex and Michael will talk about the Badgers and the Big Ten. The Packers win yesterday, the news from Week 10 in the NFL, and they'll do a quick round of buy or sell. We start out in the gridiron in Madison as the previously 17th ranked Badgers held off a tough Iowa Hawkeyes team in a 24-22 win on Saturday at Camp Randall. While the Badgers pulled off a much-needed win to keep pace in the Big Ten West Division, the team struggled on offense and defense, let Iowa back into the game in the fourth quarter. Guys, has this team regressed in terms of production?
I wouldn't say they've regressed. I would say the schedule has regressed in terms of ease, right? So obviously this has become a much tougher schedule now late in the year. You look at teams like Iowa. Previously, it was Ohio State and Illinois, both of which were losses. So this schedule is only getting harder as they move along. Obviously, the meat of that is away, but you still have an undefeated Minnesota team in a few weeks to face. So the schedule has regressed in terms of ease. I wouldn't say this team has necessarily regressed in terms of production. They haven't won every game, so maybe, yeah, you could make the argument that there's regression in that sense. But overall, no, I think they're still doing what Wisconsin does. This is a big win over the weekend. 24 points is fine. 22 defensively isn't bad, especially against a ranked opponent like the Hawkeyes are. So I'm going to say no, they haven't regressed, but the schedule's only gotten harder for them along the way.
Schedule has been part of it, too. They had to face Ohio State there. You know, they had to play a tough game against the Buckeyes a few weeks ago, and that was, of course, coming off a terrible loss to Illinois the week before, so it wasn't like necessarily anything too difficult in terms of scheduling wise. But I kind of have to disagree with you a little bit, Alex. I think they have regressed a little bit, not in terms of production overall, but they have regressed a little bit. They're not the same Badgers team we saw throughout the first 6 weeks of the season. You know, this team was putting up 30, 40 points a game. They were shutting out teams like Michigan, Michigan State, and they did have a tough team against Iowa, but at the same time, I don't really consider them a team anymore that, you know, you look at it and say, okay, maybe they'll still have a shot to maybe catch Minnesota there at the end of the season, because they're going to need a lot of help from whoever's playing Minnesota in the next couple weeks, as well as win out as leading up to the matchup against Minnesota. So I don't really feel confident right now in terms of how this Badgers team is looking, but at the same time, they're still in a position yet to contend for a Big Ten West division title.
Yeah, and I guess going off what you say, Mike, I don't know if I'd consider that regression as much as necessarily your expectations or even my expectations coming back to reality of what this Badgers team actually is. And that's not a college football playoff team. That is a solid team in the Big Ten, a team that can compete with just about anybody in the nation. But I think it's just our expectations being reverted back to reality rather than expecting so much more than the Badgers are actually capable of. We saw that against Illinois. We saw that against Ohio State. We saw them blow out teams, as you mentioned, like Michigan State, Michigan, Central Michigan, et cetera, et cetera. But now, since that Northwestern game at the end of September, this team has really come back to reality, it seems, both offensively and defensively, where they're in close ball games against solid teams, but they're not quite the level we thought they were at the beginning of the season.
That's true. That's a fair point. You know, also, too, we talked about at the beginning of the year, Jonathan Taylor looks like an absolute top candidate for the Heisman Trophy. And while he still is a very great player, still one of the top running backs in college football right now, he isn't necessarily the same running back that was making some serious headlines at the beginning of the college football season, saying, hey, you got to take a look at Jonathan Taylor. He's probably the best chance right now to win the Heisman. So I don't know. It's just, I guess it's just the turn of events that just happened with Illinois and, as you mentioned, the Northwestern game. I don't want to say the word trap games, but they don't.
It was a trap game. The Illinois one especially.
The Illinois one was a trap game. Northwestern, again, it's just, I don't know what the Badgers have against Illinois teams. They just struggle every year. But
they do.
You know what? There's still two games left in the season before Minnesota. You got to go to Nebraska, who usually has in years past been a tougher place to play, but not really so much in the past couple of years. So I feel confident that they'll go out in Nebraska and have a good game. Then they also got Purdue for their home finale as well in a couple weeks. Purdue, again, not very great in the Big Ten as well, but again, can't really take anybody lightly before Minnesota.
Exactly. You can't take anybody lightly. You're spot on. So we'll see. I mean, obviously, you're still shooting for a New Year's Bowl game, and they're in position to do that. They just have to win out. So the Badgers, I think they'll be fine, and they'll get a New Year's Bowl game. But, again, we see that hangs in the balance as we've got 3 tough games left on their schedule.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see with that. The Badgers improved to 7-2 and moved to 15 in the AP polls. They'll travel to Nebraska to face the Cornhuskers on Saturday. While nothing has officially clinched in the Big Ten, a couple of teams are moving toward a spot in the Big Ten championship. In the East, the #1 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes now control the division, in part due to Penn State's loss to Minnesota. And the Golden Gophers upset has them 2 games ahead of Wisconsin, with 3 games left to play. Guys, is the Big Ten championship almost set? Or is there still time for another team to play?
There's both. I mean, it definitely is almost set, but there is still time for the team to play spoiler. I mean, you look at Minnesota's remaining schedule: at Iowa, at Northwestern, home against Wisconsin. Those are 3 pretty tough games for the Golden Gophers the rest of the way. Now, don't get me wrong. That team looks really freaking good. They come off of that really, really impressive win over Penn State this past weekend. This team's a lot better than I thought they were. I think it is Ohio State, Minnesota in the Big Ten championship game. I think that's what we get ultimately. But there's still time for a team like Wisconsin to maybe swoop up and change that. If Iowa can play Minnesota tough this weekend, if Northwestern, I mean, both of those are road games for the Golden Gophers. I think Ohio State's a lock, but Minnesota, it's still up in the air. It's going to be tough for Wisconsin to sneak in there. You have to hope Minnesota loses out, and that's probably not going to happen. But tough schedule nonetheless. We'll see.
Yeah, and Wisconsin is going to be Iowa's biggest supporter this weekend, even though Iowa is pretty much they're eliminated from Big Ten West contention now with their loss to Wisconsin. Yeah. But now the Badgers have to look towards Iowa, and although I can't imagine Iowa being too happy about losing to Wisconsin like that in the way that they did, they almost pulled off a big win on the road at Camp Randall. But at the same time, you can play a little spoiler now. Minnesota is a top team right now. They're number 7 in the nation right now, jumped up all the way from 15. I don't think anybody was expecting them to be in the top 10 at this point right here in the season, and undefeated as well. So, if Iowa or Northwestern, those are both road games for the Gophers, they can play a little spoiler a little bit. I don't want to call them trap games either, but you can't take either of those teams lightly as well. Northwestern did play a little bit of a tough game against Purdue, but not really much I saw out of their game. I watched a little bit on Saturdays before watching a lot of that Penn State-Minnesota game.
Gotcha.
So I don't know. It's kind of tough to tell right now. It's up in the air, but Ohio State definitely is probably a lock in the Big Ten.
They have to be at this point. The Ohio State University is in the Big Ten championship game. We will see on the Minnesota note.
Yeah, and on that note, too, especially with Minnesota's defeat of Penn State, that also pretty much kind of not solidifies things, but it makes things easier for Ohio State because now Penn State has 1 loss now in the Big Ten Conference. They're still 1 game back behind Ohio State, as well. So, the college football this year has been shaping up to be something great here, and I think that with the last 3 weeks of the season, we're in for some really good stuff.
No doubt.
All right. Well, we'll take our first commercial break, but when we return, we'll talk about the Packers win versus Carolina. This is the Sports Hub on SBTV.
Being a part of the different activities and organizations that I've been a part of, I'm actually able to see myself where I'm like, hey, I actually can make a change. I'm one person that can make a difference.
Division III has helped me to develop teamwork skills, critical thinking skills, time management skills.
It's not just about basketball, or it's not just about school, it's about developing yourself as a person altogether.
I just wanted to get good grades and to do well, but it also made me realize that I have a lot of career goals.
You're there to get a full college experience, not only participate in your sport, but participate in things outside of that, and it's all about growing as a person.
My coaches have helped me with figuring out who I really am. Their lives are dedicated for us to succeed.
Welcome back to the show. Let's look now at the Green Bay Packers, who held off the Carolina Panthers 24-16 in a thrilling finish on Sunday at Lambeau Field. The game was close from start to finish, as it would literally come down to the final play of the game. But the Packers did their job and kept Carolina out of the end zone. Aaron Jones had 3 touchdowns on the day, and the defense forced a couple key turnovers as their efforts redeemed themselves after last week's loss. Guys, how much pressure did this game have on the Packers, and how can they handle it?
This game, it did have a lot of pressure on Green Bay. They were coming off a really bad loss out last week in Los Angeles, and, there was a lot of talk about whether or not this run defense could sustain Christian McCaffrey, and, I think they actually did a pretty decent job. Of course, McCaffrey still had a big day on the Carolina offense as well, but, again, looking at the offense, too, they just did not show up at all. It took them almost the entire third quarter last week to get points on the board for the first time in the game. And then in the first quarter, yesterday's game, they were able to get a touchdown on the board. They were able to go into halftime with a 4-point lead off of a questionable play call at the goal line by Coach Matt LaFleur. But I think the Packers, they had a lot of pressure coming into this game, too. You knew that Minnesota was going to be playing against a tough Dallas team later that evening, and you knew the Packers had to keep that season hope of a division title and getting back to the playoffs in the best way that they could. So the fact that they were able to go out and play a really great game, even though it did look like in the end that they were going to slip up and give the game away to Carolina or send it into overtime, they did their job. They got the job done at the goal line, stuffed McCaffrey, and the Packers were able to come out on top. But it was a lot closer than I wanted it to be. My blood pressure I could feel was going up as I was listening to the game on my way back to Steven's point.
Yeah. I think this was pressure on the entire NFC North, if that makes sense. Now listen, this is a tough game, right? Carolina's been a solid team this year. Kyle Allen's been terrific. Jair Alexander tweeted after the game Sunday, that number 7, he's legit. He's a tough player to play, and he's found his stride in Carolina, who was 5-3 entering this game. But not only did this have stress on the Packers, or pressure on the Packers, it was pressure on the entire NFC North. Because, if you're Minnesota, you're only a game behind. Green Bay's, they're in a tough ball game. You're in a tough ball game that day. You have to go out and win no matter what happens in the early game with Green Bay. For Green Bay, again, you're holding on to only a 1-game lead, so a win at least solidifies for a couple hours, you're up a game and a half. So you needed to get that win over Carolina, which they did. And Minnesota, as mentioned, ended up beating Dallas last night 28-24 in the Sunday Night Football game. So it's still a game, only a game spread between Green Bay and Minnesota. But how they handled the pressure was exactly how you look at the box score. Only 6 points allowed in the second half for Green Bay's offense. That was that touchdown early in the fourth quarter. Christian McCaffrey's only one of the day. They played well defensively, especially in that second half. So it's showing that this team is made up of multiple really good pieces, and the foundation through 10 games has now been laid that this team could do as much as win a Super Bowl. And I'm serious when I say that. I think this team has the potential to be one of the best teams we've seen in Green Bay, maybe ever. They have the tools, they have the pieces. A lot of those players have the intangibles and abilities to make this a Super Bowl championship team, and that showed against a really good Carolina team. So far, so good. They go into the bye week at 8-2. You can't be much happier than that. So they're in good shape right now with 6 games left on the schedule.
I'm curious, too, just to see how much these players follow other games going on around the league before the game starts. We'll talk about this later on in the show, but Atlanta upsetting New Orleans as well. We're on the road, Saints fall to 7-2 now, and that kind of opened things up for Green Bay. If they won that game, they would move up into the second seed for the time being now in the NFC if the playoffs were to start today.
Yeah.
Of course, you got that big Monday Night Football game tonight between San Francisco and Seattle, so depending on what that game goes like or how that game turns out, we're going to see something different. We're going to see a bit of a big shakeup here in the NFC as well. That kind of also opens things up too now for Green Bay as they get into the bye week. Now the rest up because this defense for the past 10 weeks or so has been around 24th in the league overall for defense. They had a great start to the season, like through the first 3-4 games, and then they kind of floundered a little bit after the loss to Philadelphia. And the offense, too, is somewhere around the middle of the pack as well. So while the offense and defensive standpoints have been pretty good, if you're looking at it from a Packers fan and that standpoint, but other than that, if you're looking at it from a league standpoint or something like that, you see that the Packers are kind of like around the middle of the pack, despite all the talent that they got, too, as well.
You talk about the middle of the pack. Not in the middle of the pack is Aaron Jones, who now leads the NFL in total touchdowns on the season with 14. He passed his counterpart in yesterday's game, Christian McCaffrey, who was leading the league. Aaron Jones, as mentioned earlier, went out for 3 touchdowns. Guy went bananas yesterday in Green Bay's win over Carolina. He now leads the NFL in touchdowns. So we keep bringing up these pieces that the Packers have. They have the right ones this year, and it's crazy. This is definitely the best, most successful, at least, running back Aaron Rodgers has played with, if not since Eddie Lacy's Rookie of the Year season, maybe ever in Rodgers' career. So this 1-2 punch between Jamal Williams and Jones, it's a lot of fun for Green Bay.
The fact that the Packers actually have a strong backfield with Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams is really great. The last time that the Packers running back had multiple three touchdown games was previously done by Jim Taylor back in 1962.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the last time that the Packers running back had multiple 3 touchdown games in the season. So,
Wow.
It's been a while. It's been a long time since Green Bay has had a running back, or even 2 of that matter, that have been really, really great. I guess you could maybe say Amon Green was the last Packers running back that was very solid, one of the top in the league, but it's kind of hard to go back to as that far back as well, because running backs have not been Green Bay's forte the past few years.
Never.
And this year, the past few years even, it's been jumping up to high proportions. And even same thing with the wide receiving core as well. You take a look at the young guys that are out there on the field: Alan Lazard, Jake Kummerow, Marcus Valdez-Scantling as well.
Yeah, those guys are making plays, and they continue to. Obviously, Devontae Adams now back in the mix for Green Bay, but for the last 2 weeks. But obviously, those younger guys have been called upon to step up, and they've done so really well. Rodgers had another solid game yesterday. Not a Rodgers-esque game by any means, but still solid, and those receivers were finding plays all over the field. Aaron Jones did most of the scoring, but Aaron Rodgers was still helping out with just under 300 yards on the day.
Yeah, it was a great game overall. I was very happy to see it. Again, as I mentioned it, they did put me through a lot of stress on my drive back, and the snow didn't help. Honestly, the worst thing about listening or even watching the game was just listening to Joe Buck. That honestly was the worst part about the game.
You can be a handful sometimes. The Packers improved to 8-2 and continue to hold a 1-game lead in the NFC North. They will go on their well-deserved bye week this weekend before the next game against the San Francisco 49ers. After our final commercial break, we'll talk about the Week 10 of the NFL season and do our classic buy or sell segment.
Classic.
This is the Sports Hub on SBTV.
UW-Stevens Point is home.
It's a university where professors know your name and get you involved in research.
They inspire us to realize big dreams.
At UW-Stevens Point, sustainability is what we stand for.
Our beautiful campus encourages exploration, developing new fields, and problem-solving for the real world.
It's a great place to launch your career.
UW-Stevens Point is home.
Apply today at uwsp.edu.
Welcome back into the Sports Hub. From week to week, the NFL produces some interesting storylines. The 1-7 Atlanta Falcons had the upset of the week as they beat division rival New Orleans at home to give them their second loss of the season, while the Titans and Steelers both got much-needed wins against Kansas City and the LA Rams, respectively. The Jets beat the Giants in the Battle of the Meadowlands, and the Vikings got a nice road win in Dallas. Guys, what do you think of the landscape so far this season in the NFL?
It's been an ongoing theme with me, at least the last few years, how happy I've been with the parity in the NFL, right? Mike, we've done hits on this for the last, 3 years now.
True.
We've talked about parity in this league, and again, this year it's high, which is great. It makes for a much better product in the National Football League. It increases watchability, viewership, et cetera, et cetera. It's ultimately a really good thing where you have no idea who the hell is going to win from week to week. That's really, really exciting in the National Football League. When you look at teams like Kansas City and New Orleans, who follow the teams that really aren't that good all of a sudden, and we're in week 10, and now we start thinking, okay, now what happens in 7 weeks when we're in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
When these really good teams are going to face even better teams than they're losing to in week 10. So it ultimately makes you question and scratch your head and wonder if this is a fluke or if this is legitimate, if this is how good Atlanta actually can be. Can they actually be as good as to consistently beating a team like New Orleans, even though they only have 2 wins on the season? So it makes you question everything, which is an exciting thing, especially this late in the NFL season.
Yeah, and week 10 already of the season, like we're going through. Like the Packers, they're going to be on their bye week, so this is actually going to be a first weekend since the end of August, around that time, where the Packers aren't playing. So we're going to have some time to like just watch other games going on throughout the weekend. We saw some really good stuff this past Sunday. New Orleans taking their second loss this season against Atlanta of all teams. A division, win, and also a upset of one of the top teams in the NFC right now. That's got to at least put something in Atlanta's gas tank, in terms of continuing to go through this season. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to mean anything different because Dan Quinn is still very much on the hot seat in Atlanta.
Oh, he has to be.
Yeah, there's really no way that he's off the hot seat now, unless like Atlanta just miraculously has a turnaround here for the next 7 weeks.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the only possible way, right? The best they could go is, 9-7 still? So they can still rattle off 7 straight wins. We've talked about Atlanta every week, Mike, and they're such an anomaly, such a weird team, especially this year. 2-7, nobody would have thought that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, is it impossible they turn it around? I don't think so, especially from what we saw this weekend. But it seems still pretty darn rare and unlikely that Atlanta will turn it around and turn into a playoff team. And if they do, Dan Quinn, he has to be safe, I think. But at this point, no, very, very much still on the hot seat.
Yeah, and if we're still also talking about coaches on the hot seat, too, I was watching a little bit of that Jets and Giants game, and I don't really know. I think that wasn't a very smart decision on my end because it's between those two New York teams. They're both in the bottom of the NFL.
Yeah,
anyway. But, there was one point, it was around 4.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The Jets were up by 7 points, and the Jets lost 2 challenges in 11 seconds. I don't know if that explains their team this year and the measures that how they've been as a program.
Adam Gase
though
is such. I still don't understand why he is the head coach in New York. I don't know why they didn't hire Mike McCarthy. It makes no darn sense to me whatsoever. But yeah, I mean, I picked the Jets as a playoff team this year. I had faith in them. It's just their coaching staff is failing their talent. So that's too bad as well.
And you're also going to be looking at teams, too, that are going to definitely look into coaching next year. They're definitely going to want to hire, or not hire, essentially, but interview Mike McCarthy. Because he's going to be a candidate out there that teams are going to go out and interview as well.
He'll be out there 100%. Yeah. I'm with you.
All right, now let's do a quick round of buy or sell. First one, Dalvin Cook is the best running back in the NFL?
I'm going to sell that. I think it's still Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley. Ezekiel Elliott did not show great against Dalvin Cook last night. But I'll still take at least those 2 names, if not Ezekiel Elliott as well. I will take Saquon Barkley, who's been dealing with an injury, and Christian McCaffrey, who's the front runner for the MVP right now.
I'll be a little different. I don't really like to say this, but I'll buy it. He isn't necessarily like a guy you say, okay, yeah, he's an elite running back or whatever. But, right now he's the top running back. But on the other side, though, you got Aaron Jones, who's been leading the league now in rushing touchdowns. So you might want to throw Aaron Jones into consideration for best running back in the NFL.
Yeah, I think it's such a subjective conversation because when you say best, I think overall obviously in this sense we're saying right now, Dalvin Cook's definitely in the conversation for the best back right now. Again, I still think Christian McCaffrey is the front runner just because he's in that MVP conversation with a 5-4 team. He's second in touchdowns in the league. He's had just a bananas year offensively, so he's got to be number one. But you could absolutely make the case for Dalvin Cook at number 2 this year for top running back in the NFL.
All right, next up. What do you guys think of this one? Alabama's loss to LSU will not hurt their chance of making the championship in the college playoff.
So I'm going to sell this, but I'll sell it cheap. So I think it hurts as much as it can when you're losing to the number 1 team in the country. LSU will definitely be ranked number 1 in both the CFP poll and they are in the AP poll, which has already been released. CFP comes out later this week. But they'll be number 1. Alabama should probably still be top 4, if not top 5. I don't think it was a super ugly loss. LSU, who I've been saying for weeks is the best team in the country, and they showed that this weekend. So it's going to hurt them, again, as much as a loss to the number 1 team in the country can hurt you. I think if LSU wins out, Alabama wins out, they both should be in the well, actually, I don't think they can both win out. But nonetheless, if LSU stays undefeated, I think Alabama probably still makes the playoff.
I saw that too. I think Alabama, if they had like somehow, some way lost to a team that was lower in the AP poll of some sort, like another SEC team, then yeah, I would say definitely that, you might want to take a look at this Alabama team overall and say, hey, don't put them in the CFP yet. But they lost to a great LSU team who's still, around like number 1, number 2 in the polls right now. So, it's going to come down to the committee itself. But Alabama's still going to be a name that's considered whether or not they have 1 or 2 losses on the season. And I think they'll only have that one loss on the season as they finish out the college football schedule. But it's hard to say that Alabama isn't going to be in consideration.
All right. The next one up is the Badgers boys basketball team will compete for a Big Ten championship this season.
Yeah, I'm going to sell that all the way. I think the Big Ten is the most stacked, if not second most stacked conference in college basketball this year. Michigan State, obviously, a top 5 team. You can make the case for about, I don't know, maybe 6 other teams in the Big Ten that could place over Wisconsin. I can't sit here and lie to you. They're not going to battle for a Big Ten championship game. Lucky if they win 1 or 2 games in the Big Ten tournament come late February, early March. But I still think they're an NCAA tournament team. So take that for what it may be.
I'm going to have to agree with you on that part where they're an NCAA tournament team, but I'm also going to say that it's pretty borderline. They're a borderline NCAA tournament team, NIT team. I do agree, though, that they are not going to compete for a Big Ten championship unless, they just completely take control of this conference schedule. They don't have Ethan Happ anymore. He's graduated and out from no longer with Wisconsin. So, it's going to come down to guys like Kobe King, Demetric Trice. There's a few names on there.
Brad Davison.
Brad Davison as well. He's still around. He's going to be looking to have a great senior year. So it'll come down to really how well this Badgers team can play throughout the Big Ten season and college basketball season.
We will see.
We will see indeed. Well, that's all we have for today's show. I'd like to thank Alex and Michael for being here on the show, and a big thank you to all of our technical staff for making this show possible. Be sure to check us out on Facebook at SBTV UWSP Television, and follow us on Instagram at SBTV_UWSP. You can also follow our SBTV and SBTV Sports Twitter accounts as well. Lastly, don't forget to tune into SBTV's broadcast of the final UWSP football game of the season on Saturday on the UWSP Athletics YouTube page. Thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of the Sports Hub.